And welcome back to another daily devotion. I'm Pastor Roy here at Woodlawn Christian Church in Lake City, Iowa, and this devotion is for Monday, August 21st of 2023. We are in the book of First Timothy. We're in the second chapter. We're going to end the second chapter today, and we've come to what may be the most contentious bit of scripture that is attributed to Paul. And remember, when I started this, and I've mentioned it a couple times, I think, through this day so far, the majority of scholars would believe that Paul didn't actually pen these three letters, the First Timothy, Second Timothy, and Titus, what's called the pastorals. Most would say that Paul didn't write them. And I think part of the reason why so many people want to not have this be Paul is because of what we're going to deal with today here in chapter 2, verses 8 to 15. It's a doozy, as they say. Now, we do want to be careful. Many times, as I have said over and over, we want to rationalize away things that we don't like, that we're uncomfortable with, things that we want to not to be so. I believe the scriptures that are condemning homosexuality. This is very much the case. We've gone, and I used to ascribe to this line of thinking. We push them away by trying to change the definition of the words, or to say that certain things didn't exist in the ancient world when in fact they did. As one does more study and one does a little more research and one looks at people that don't have a particular bias and don't have a dog in the fight, you've got to be careful. Everybody wants their sin to be legitimatized. We'd really like that, wouldn't we? For me, I would love to be able to walk into Scripture and say that divorce was not a sin, but it's there, guys and gals, and I'm guilty of that one. I can't escape that. No matter what I do, I forever have been stained by that sin that I'd committed. And so we'd like to rationalize the way. Nobody than myself would love better to rationalize the way the verses that Jesus himself spoke, condemning divorce as a sin. But nonetheless, Jesus didn't talk about homosexuality. No, he didn't. But he did. But Paul has, and plenty of times where they were just inescapable. But here we have a little different story. These verses, and these are more explosive than talking about homosexuality, because this is talking about women, and women are 50% of the population, roughly. By a certain age, women are more than half the population, and in our pews, they are way over half, typically, because we have widowers, and we have women that come to church that are coming without their husbands, but sometimes because the husbands work, or sometimes because the husbands don't want to come, or whatever reason. But at any rate, I would guess that in the majority of our churches, if we were to look through the pews and to count off the number of people in the pews and break it down by sex, we're way over half women. And that's the way it is here at Woodlawn. We're definitely over half, without a doubt. We're way over half women in church on any given Sunday. There may be exceptions throughout the year, but not many. So we run into some verses here that are a little more bothersome, and they cause a lot of problems. And again, sometimes people try to dispel them and write them off by saying, well, Paul didn't really write them. Whoever else wrote that. So we can just, if that's the case, then we pretty much got to disregard all three of the letters, which I think we're in deep danger if we try to go that line of thinking. I don't want to go there. Hopefully you don't either. So what are we going to do? Well, first of all, N.T. Wright, who I've mentioned before in this study of the First Timothy, N.T. Wright does a really good job with these scriptures, with these verses of First Timothy chapter 2, 8 to 15. If you go and look him up on YouTube, I may put a link to one of his videos. There's two of them that I've seen. He does an excellent job of explaining what is going on here. And context is important. And the first thing you have to look at are these instructions being given to Timothy, whoever wrote them to Timothy, are they given to Timothy for this particular location, which is Ephesus, where there is a temple to Artemis or to Diana, and it's the largest temple, and there all of the priests are women, and the show is run completely by women, and they would have been adorned, elaborately adorned, or provocatively adorned, or both. Um, and braided hair and gold and pearls and costly attire. The braided hair, especially, it's thought was a provocative thing, a sensual thing. It's not so much today, I don't think, but who knows? For some it is, or some it isn't. Whatever. I digress. But it is in that culture. So that braided hair thing, there's a reason for that, and the way they're attired, there's a reason for that, and for the reason talking about the women, there's a reason for that too. And so let's read the verses, and we'll dive into them as we go along, and see if we can't figure this out about what the writer here. We'll say it's Paul for today. Let's go with Paul, right, for today. What is Paul trying to get across to us? Verses 8 to 15. I desire then that in every place the men should pray, lifting holy hands without anger or quarreling. Also that women should adorn themselves modestly and sensibly in seemingly apparel, not with braided hair or gold or pearls or costly attire, but by good deeds as befits women who profess religion. Let a woman learn in silence with all submissiveness. I permit no woman to teach or to have authority over men. She is to keep silent. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. And Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and became a transgressor. Yet woman will be saved through bearing children, if she continues in faith and love and holiness with modesty. Now, here's a place where the RSV kind of messes up a little, I think, in the translation. Okay, but the first thing we want to mention, or we should note when we're in verse 8, I desire. Who's I? Paul, or the author. I desire. It doesn't say God desires, does it? Paul. There's times when Paul says, "I'm, not. I don't have an authority on this. This is me speaking, but this is what I think. I desire." Doesn't, again, not saying God desires. That in every place the men should pray. Okay, first of all, the first thing out of the gate is he's going after the men. Seems there's been an issue with men with anger and quarreling. There's been maybe they're throwing hands at the men in worship, and that's the other thing, is that this is thought to be about worship. That perhaps even going as we go into chapter 3, that this is all about a worship service. But here, this very well may be that we're talking about an individual worship service. All right, that every place men should pray. The men aren't praying enough, apparently. They're not being godly enough, lifting holy hands without anger or quarreling. They're supposed to get in line, behave in service. So don't think that it's just coming down on the ladies. It's right out of the gate. He's smacking the men right in the side of the head here. Also, that women should adorn themselves modestly and sensibly in seemly apparel, in common apparel. And some people think that there was, because of the diversity and the economics, perhaps that's what he's getting at there. He doesn't want people to be, some people are showing up dressed to the nines, as they say, and others only can show up in very modest clothing. So he wants, excuse me, pardon me, forgive me too. He wants them to show up dressed accordingly for church with reverence, to be quite honest. We should always be dressed with reverence. In modern church, we've kind of lost our way on that one, but again, I digress. Not with braided hair. Again, the idea is that perhaps that the reason for that, and it makes sense, and it seems to be a historical thing, that the braided hair was a sensual thing. So that's a provocative thing. So don't dress provocatively or costly attire. Again, looking to those priestesses in the temples there in Ephesus, so that they wouldn't be doing that. Don't be doing that. Don't dress like those ladies, because you have temple prostitutes, for crying out loud. I mean, that's just this is not good optics, as they would say in this day and age. But by good deeds as befits women who profess religion. Now, of course, Paul doesn't believe in salvation by works, but he's saying that behave as you should in worship, if this is in fact in worship. But you also should behave in this in society, because again, people see you out and about and how you behave and how you live your life. That says something. You also do, though, as I've said in a recent sermon, you do need to be sharing the word, not just living your life, and that's the only example. But I'm going to digress once more. Um, Let women learn in silence with all submissiveness. Now, the fact that he's saying that women should be there learning in a patriarchal society, that's revolutionary. That's a big deal. Let women learn in silence. Don't bother them. Let them be. To learn in silence, it's someone that's giving someone. It means to give someone the time. In the Greek, give someone the time to study. Leave them alone. Let them study. Let them learn. Let them worship. And so that's not a. It's translated poorly, I think. With all submissiveness. Does that say submissiveness to men? No, it doesn't. It's submissiveness to God, which all of us, man, woman, child, we should all be submissive to the Lord. So you learn in reverence and silence and submissiveness. It's not just saying that women only can do that. Now, verse 12 is where we really get into a bit of a sticky wicky, as they say, and N.T. Wright does a particularly good job of talking about that. He says that he maintains that's really mistranslated. I permit no woman to teach or to have authority over men. She is to keep silent. Now, what he is saying is that is actually saying is, I am not setting women up over men. And the reason for that goes back to those temples where you have the priestess, and where the priestess were the ones in charge. And perhaps you've got some women in this particular congregation that maybe have converted from that. Maybe they were even priestesses. We can't know, but we can speculate, which makes my wife crazy when I do that. But we can speculate that maybe they were, they're used to being running the show, and they're trying to be a little bit too bossy, and they're causing disruption. And maybe that's where you got some of this anger and quarreling with that's going on here. I don't know. But N.T. Wright maintains that I permit no woman is saying that he's not setting up a woman. They're no better than the men, is what N.T. Wright is kind of getting at. So he's saying that verse is entirely misunderstood, and that the Greek there seems to be quite unclear. What he says seems to, in the context and the location and the time and all of that, I think N.T. Wright does a pretty good job with this. I really like his take on this bit of verses. And again, we have to be careful. When I'm very cautious about rationalizing things away, because I see, especially liberal scholars, being way too clever by half, as they say, in their rationalization, and they can just flip stuff on their head and say exactly the opposite of what is really trying to get through. And I see that over and over. Here, though, I think that we've probably the very conservative translation of this is probably the one that needs to be corrected. We need to understand that it's this particular place, this particular time, and what's going on there. All right. So, moving on to 13. For Adam was formed first, then Eve. That's the order of creation. That's that's coming out of Genesis. So, whatever. And Adam was not deceived. Well, he wasn't deceived by the serpent, but he allowed himself to be misled by the woman. So who did the worst? The woman was deceived by this clever and sneaky snake, or so to say, in this story of the story of the fallen nature of man. The man transgressed. Oh yeah, she said, yeah, whatever. I'm going along to get along. So actually, I think he's in a worse light in that, and I agree with that from some of the others. So it's not there again. It's not. I don't see that as being the women being put down. It's the man was really the moron here, beyond, to be completely honest and brutal. Yet woman will be saved through bearing children. That's part of the story about women having pain in childbirth. If she continues. Now, the RSV really blows it there. because that should be if they continue. And who's they? Is that they women? Or is it much more likely in the way that these verses have been going, it's the husband and wife. They are a unit. Man, woman joins together and be fruitful and multiply. We're supposed to have children. We might not like that, and some of us can't have children because for biological reasons and physical reasons, or because we never find a spouse or what have you. But that is one of the things we're supposed to do. That's what marriage is. A part of marriage is to be fruitful, to multiply, to raise up children, and that is part of it. And so maybe that's not any less controversial, I guess, if you want to say it that way. But I think that's what's being said here. Both the man and the woman are being saved from their sins. The man was sinned as well as the woman, in faith and love and holiness with modesty, understanding their place, being reverent to God, putting God in the proper place, which is why we fell. Like this, the story of the fall is that we put ourselves above God, our ego. We need to check our egos all the time. I preach about that, and I pitch about that all the time. Ego gets us in trouble more than anything in life. It's 90% of the problems I've had in this world are because my ego got me into trouble. It doesn't matter what context it's in. That's what it is, and I see that problem in others as well as my own past, and I see it. Unfortunately, I can't say I've shaken that beast away completely. I struggle with that, but. Any rate, back to the topic at hand. That's what I see in these verses, 8 to 15 in chapter 2 of 1 Timothy. Again, some of the most contentious writings that we have in Paul's, what is attributed to Paul by many, but not most. These again, majority of biblical scholars would probably say this wasn't Paul, but. Is that partly because we want to use that as a way to negate these verses rather than to look at them as N.T. Wright has? And again, I mentioned N.T. Wright is one of the few scholars that does think that Paul wrote these letters. I don't know, but it's interesting. This one went long. I knew it would because this is a tough one. So with that, I'm going to let you go for today, but I've enjoyed talking to you today. Hopefully that made some sense to you. Hopefully it gave you a little bit of thought to do a little more exploration and more investigation and learning about these scriptures, to see that they're not saying what we oftentimes think they're saying. And I will confess, my wife is more conservative than I am. She doesn't like women as ministers. She doesn't like that at all. She thinks ministers, and I don't think she's doing it from a biblical standpoint. I think she's doing it more from her own personal experience. That's what she grew up with, and that's what she thinks the way it should be, that men should be the ones in the pulpit, not women. And I don't agree with her on that. I think there's not a problem with having women in the pulpit in my world, in my opinion. That's just an example of how we don't always have to agree, folks. We can live together, love each other, without being in complete agreement on things that are in the scripture, or even the things that we do in the practice in the church. Because sometimes that's maybe even more contentious, is what we do on a given Sunday, because it's tradition, and we've always done it that way. Have a blessed day. Be a blessing to someone today. If you like these devotions, please do like and subscribe. All right? Hopefully we'll see you tomorrow. God bless. Bye-bye.